Yeah, but
How you doing, Bryan?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
We
We
were
got
talking about though. I don't think
we
we really
got
talk about
yeah,
as much, but
we got my security officer in here, Jessica. She's really busy. uh,
nice. Sweet.
so all right, so today, yeah, we may not talk about Wi-Fi so much as cabling and switching because that's sometimes a cause for the problems that are blamed on the Wi-Fi, right?
Not sometimes.
Almost
Most.
always, we're finding.
It's most of the time.
Yeah,
Right. I read that 95% of the issues is at the layer one.
yeah.
It was at layer one. And that I'm finding to be very true. So.
Yeah, so I have two recently. Like, people they're not getting claim speed, or they're having intermittent problems. It's usually a cable that's been there a long time, or they pulled one out of the bag that shipped with some other device that may only be Cat 5 or something. That's been sitting around like. You have this cable rot where you throw them in the drawer. You don't know how old they are, what kind they are. You just grab one when you need it, right?
Yeah, I just had that conversation yesterday because I remember working for a break and fix company. It'd be MSP today, but a break and fix company, and we just had like a drawer like with just cables in it,
Yeah.
and we just go in and grab a cable, and sometimes you just rip it out,
Yeah.
just to get it out.
And you don't know what it is.
Test it. Yeah.
But you have these new. I don't know if you can see these. It's focusing Cat 6A cables. They're nice and thin. These things are great. You can run PoE over them. But that's what I do. I would start off with new cables when you're going into to an installation that's going to save yourself a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah,
you saw a problem just recently, right?
Yeah. Every week
Yeah.
there's always some sort of cabling, but I guess I'd probably be in the same situation or feel the same way. That typically somebody's coming in with a lot of confidence that it's not the cable,
Yeah.
but then you've troubleshot it to a point of there's no other thing to check than the cable,
Yeah.
and so that's finally checked, and it's like, oh, it's the wrong cable type. It's there's a kink in the cable, the connector's broken, the cable's too long. In the most recent case, the cables were bad. But that's what it was always. It was just told oh, the cable's bad. But you could see on the interface of the switch, the physical switch,
Yeah.
or in the cloud, and that's true for maybe some other vendors, but it will tell you that the speed that that port's on or negotiated at, and you can kind of indicate it from there. So this particular customer had a multi-gig switch and a 230, and it should link up at 2.5 gig, and it was linked up at 100 and a gig. So I was like, okay, there's something wrong there, and sure enough, it was just the cable. I don't know if it was the quality of the cable, the length of the cable, or the type of cable, but one of those items.
And it's tough. There's resistance there because if the cable's in play, cabling can be the most expensive part of the installation for Wi-Fi, because somebody actually has to run that thing and terminate it and do all this. So if they're experiencing bad Wi-Fi and they just replace the access points, they're still experiencing bad Wi-Fi. It's probably the cabling.
That's interesting. You're going to replace an access point, but not replace the cable or look at the cable.
Yeah.
If you're at a point of replacing an access point because of an issue, I would definitely look at the cable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The energy that it takes to go in to replace an access point is huge compared to I know running cable is a major thing, but for you to take an access point and test it on a shorter cable or a different cable to see if that's the problem, that shouldn't take long at all. You know what I mean?
Right, but it's almost never done. It's almost because they put it where they need it to be, and then they complain. Then they RMA it. Yeah.
RMA the access point. Hey, we're gonna ship it. Hey, when am I gonna get this thing back? There's a lot of energy spent on, a replacement of a device, and you're not gonna cables
Yeah.
Pretty kind of crazy.
So they should be Cat 6E or better cable. I mean Cat 5E or better cables, right? To run at 2.5 gig in the highest speeds, right?
Yeah, Cat. If you have Cat 5, just get rid of it.
Yeah. Cat 5E, Cat 6, Cat 6A. It's all good for the speeds that we're talking about now. But at Cat 5, just throw it away, like you said, because you're gonna pull it out at some point, and you're gonna wonder, why you're only linking at 100 meg.
Yeah, and what are you gonna do with 100 meg now?
Yeah.
Nowadays, with your switches at a gig, 2.5 gig, 10 gig, your access points at a gig, 2.5, 5, and even 10, depending on the technology.
Yeah.
Or not just access points, but surveillance cameras and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I guess you would know this better than me, but I guess phones would link up at 100 megabits.
Not even anymore. Like, the old ones do, but like any of these modern ones, like this is gigabit. This Yealink. These things are has 2 gigabit ports on it. So I have Cat 6A going into this with PoE to power it. So even phones are gigabit now because they have that pass-through port. They have 2 ports. One you can plug a PC into. If you're sitting at a desk and you got 2 drops, you can plug your laptop into the phone.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Maybe you have a desktop and a laptop. You plug it into the phone. You still get a link at a gig speed. So yeah, even phones. I mean, some IP cameras. I mean, they're all gigabit now.
So get rid of your Cat.
Yeah, get rid of those Cat 5s. All right, so we'll kind of segue into. We're talking a little bit about 2.5 gigabit switching, and I know Ingenious has a couple cloud models with PoE, one with PoE that we sell quite a bit of.
We have 4 multi-gig. I say 4 multi-gig, but 2 are multi-gig, like 2.5 gig. 2 are 10 gig.
Yeah.
2.5 gig. One is a non-PoE switch. The other one is a PoE switch.
Right.
The same with the 10 gig. One is non-PoE and one is PoE. Or I should say PoE++.
Yeah, they're PoE++, right? So, so these things can provide up to 60 watts of power for some devices, and they can link at 2.5 gigs. So I've got actually 3 of these ECS 2512 FPs here in my network, and I actually have them linked at 10 gig using the SFP Plus modules, and so we kind of want to talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about that next, but for the 2.5 gig, that's kind of being required for the for the Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6 E access points that are coming out, right? Because the speeds are getting pushed up.
So we're starting to see that more, where you're needing faster than the gigabit ports. So I'm running the 10 gig switch.
Yep.
In my house, but the majority of the access points are now 2.5 gig, 5, 6E will probably bring 2.5 gig, 5, and up to 10.
They could have 5 too. So the ECW 230 access point over here, this has 2.5 gig and it's linked into the switch at 2.5 gig. And like you said earlier, you can see from the cloud interface the coloring that it's linked at 2.5. So that's a easy way to glance at it and see what's going on. And then we have like the Ruckus R750 over here. That one does have 2.5 and 5, but I don't think we're even saturating like a gigabit until you're in like a high density situation, like multiple clients.
Almost a single client to access.
Right. Because the single client you're still only getting maybe 650 meg throughput. Probably at most 657. Maybe you can, if you only have one access point, you can get higher speeds for short duration. That I'm talking at 80 megahertz channel width. So
80, 160. I guess if you 160.
So if you got up to 160, you probably with single client, you probably would go over that 1 gigabit and start using the 2.5. But I think with 6E we'll definitely use it, and it's probably a good idea to future proof anyway with these multi-gig switches.
Yeah, I know there's been some testing out there with 6E, and they've seen over a gigabit already.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're definitely going to see that with 6E. Um, so, yeah, the importance of multi-gig or 10 gig switches, 5 gig switches is becoming more and more important. And there's more reasons to install it now. Definitely, for sure.
And you can link these things switch to switch at 2.5 gig too. So you're expanding
Yeah.
your backbone to 2.5 gig there, or you can use the SFP plus modules, which is the way you normally uplink switches.
Yeah.
So you can either put like a fiber optic module in there, or you could use something called a Twinax cable, which I would pull out, but I'd probably lose my video. I've got a couple of them over here in use, but the Twinax is basically just a copper cable on both sides, and they're shorter distances, maybe like, I don't know, a couple meters. But if you have two switches in a rack, that's the easiest way to link them at 10 gig. You just get this Twinax cable. It's really like $10. It's not expensive at all, and you just plug them in. And I also have a Twinax cable linked to my desktop, because you can get SFP Plus modules that will connect to your desktop computer, right? So that's the cheapest way to link at 10 gig, because 10 gig Ethernet adapters are still pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So that's one way.
Yeah, and so yeah, we will have a copper option here.
Yeah.
Coming up soon. So right now we have 3 SFPs. One is a 1 gigabit, and the other 2 are 10. But we will have a copper option as well. You should post your link on the Twinax that you.
Yeah, I will. I'll post underneath here. I did a blog post about the Twinax and the copper module. So we're talking about two different things. So the SFP plus the copper module means you're going to plug this module into your SFP plus port on a switch, and then you can plug in a Cat 5e, Cat 6 Ethernet cable into that and get 2.5 or 10 gig link speeds. So you're basically adding more copper Ethernet ports to that switch, and I'm using those all over. So I've got those copper modules in all 3 of my switches. So I have them linked at 10 gig using those copper modules without any fiber run at all. So that's a big plus. I mean, you're getting 10 gig speeds between switches without having to run fiber if you don't have it already. And you can even use Cat 5e to link at 10 gig at shorter distances, maybe up to 50 feet, which I'm doing.
It's I think it's 45 meters, 10 gig. I was just reading that.
45 meters at Cat 5e?
Cat 5e.
Oh, okay.
10 gigabit up to 45 meters. Cat 6 gives you another 10 meters, so 10 gigabit up to 55 meters.
Okay.
Cat 6A is 10 gigabit up to 100 meters.
Wow. Okay, I wish I ran Cat 6A, but I didn't.
You don't need it.
Yeah, you don't need it, but you do have to make sure your cables are terminated well, when you're doing this sort of thing, because when I first did it, I had an intermittent connection, which I didn't see at 1 gig, so again, cabling.
I blamed it on the...
I blamed it on the switch, in the firmware and the switch. But yeah, so you do have to have your cables pretty tight when you're running 10 gig on Cat 5e and shorter distances also. But it makes it really flexible. These modules are pretty cheap, and there's a reviewer on YouTube that tested a bunch of these modules, and they all performed about the same. But the ones that I had to actually use a couple different ones before I could get them to work. And I'll link to the ones I'm using in the comments in case anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah.
All right. So then the other thing we wanted to talk about was PoE standards also. So I know Ingenious has a few different PoE injectors, and what's the difference between the different access points? Like, what are the requirements right now?
So a majority of them are just PoE and PoE Plus.
Right.
Are the main two. So PoE provides up to 15.4 watts of power. PoE Plus provides up to 30 watts of power.
Yep.
But it's all dependent on what you're trying to power up. There's some camera. You have to look at your camera spec. You have to look at your access point spec, your phone spec. Like a phone, for example, doesn't take a lot of power. It's like 4 or 5 watts, I think.
Yeah.
Like an access point ranges anywhere. It depends on the access point, how big the access point is, what technology the access, it's using, how much load is going to be on the access point. So,
right.
I can only speak to the cloud side of things in regards to our access points, but there's 3 access points that are PoE. So that's up to 15.4 watts. It doesn't max out over 15 watts. And then the 11AX model is actually the 111AX model, the ECW 220 is AF. So it only needs up to 15.4 watts. When you get into the 230, the ECW 230, which is a 4x4 11AX, and the 260, which is an outdoor, they're PoE plus, so up to 30 watts.
Up to 30 watts. So don't use a smaller injector or switch with an access point that requires the full AT power. Because like one thing you mentioned there, when the access point's lightly loaded, you may not see it pulling much power, but once you get a lot of users on there, it starts to ramp up, pulling more power, and then you could start seeing weird problems. Some access points, if you don't give them enough power, they'll reduce functionality or reduce transmit power, or they'll just have some sort of problem. So always check the spec on the access point as far as what it needs.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you can go into a very deep rabbit hole of troubleshooting when, like, the PoE, you're not getting enough power to the access point, because like you said, it appears to be working fine. The light statuses are fine, but under load, it could be under light load, it will start to act kind of weird.
Yeah.
The problem, it could be something like, oh, there's packet loss, that's weird. There's something wrong with the radio, just weird stuff. So yeah, I mean, that goes back to the physical layer again, and making sure, well, not necessarily the physical layer, making sure it has enough power and stuff. So you could run into some weird things if you don't have enough power.
Now, Ingenious only really has like 1 or 2 injectors right now that that the EPA 5006 GAT, and that's a full 30 watt AT injector.
I use that on everything.
Yeah, so you can use that on everything basically, and it'll work fine. But once you go to PoE switches, make sure that if you're using like those 230s, that you're using a full power switch, because Ingenious does have some half power switches like the ECS 1008P. That one's only AF, so you wouldn't want to use that with the 230. You can use that with the 220, with the 120, which makes a nice little switch. But if you're using the 230, then you got to go up to a full power switch, which is the ECS 1112 FP.
Yeah, not full power, but just a different standard.
A 30 watt 802.11 AT PoE switch.
So the ECS 1008P is a PoE, so it's up to 15.4 watts on every port. You have a 55 watt budget, and then that's a basic 8-port switch.
Yeah.
And you can use that with the ECW 220 as an example. But if you move into the 230, the ECW 230. Yeah, you have to go to the ECS 1112 FP and up.
Right.
So sorry to throw out part numbers there, but
and you talked about budget too, so that's no one ever thinks about budget, and because it's hard to calculate. Because no one.
No, it's not hard.
It's not hard. Okay, so tell me how to calculate it. What do you do?
It's hard to explain. Yes, I think that's what you're. It's not, well, so every switch, all PoE switches have a PoE, they have a budget. They have a certain amount of power that they can allocate out to the ports, right? And so as you add in devices like access points and cameras and phones that you're powering up, you're taking away from the total budget.
Right.
So it depends on the spec of the device. So first you have to identify what's the max power of that device, and then from there you have to understand your PoE budget and
Yeah.
how many devices you could power up on that particular device.
Right, but it can be hard because manufacturers don't always publish the exact power consumption, the maximum, because it's tough. Like
Yeah.
it really depends.
Well, luckily with Ingenious, we state the maximum power
Okay.
need, the
Okay.
peak power.
And
So,
then
for example, the access point, if we state on our access point spec, it needs 23 watts. That's peak power.
Yep.
So under heavy load for that access point, you're going to need at least 23 watts. So you have to move to an AT switch, PoE plus switch, and you also know how much power budget you need if you have multiple access points.
Right. So and don't look at your switch and be like, oh, it's only using like 6 watts a port or something. It should be fine. But when those things are booting up or when they're loaded, they're going to start pulling more power.
Exactly.
So and the switch will actually shut power off if you exceed that budget. Right. I haven't seen that happen, but it can happen, I guess.
And you can set the budgets per port as well.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you can set it per port, but yeah, look at those manufacturer maximum power consumptions and to kind of figure out, what you're gonna need for a switch. So, you may want like that 1112FP has a 130 watt budget, but then once you move up to a 24 port, those have like a 410 watt budget usually, right?
Yeah.
And then you go to a 48, they may have the same, they may have more of the same, but you may not be using, you may not be using all those ports for access points when you're at 48 port, maybe for more like drops and things like that.
Yeah. And then surveillance cameras, they use a lot of power.
Oh yeah,
Like,
once you're looking at the 4K ones or ones that have heaters in them and things like that, those are the kind of devices that can start using that 60 watts of power for the PoE++.
Yep. PTZ.
Yep. Yeah, I've seen some. I had somebody asking about those this week. So yeah, always size your switches to the device you're using, and just be careful. Don't look at what it's currently using. Look at what the maximum that it can draw would be.
Yeah, and the one thing I would bring up, because that was a good point you brought up. So in Genius, when we state for an access point, we state the peak power. But yeah, if you're looking at other vendors, make sure what you're looking at is either peak power or maybe it's average power consumption. So you're looking at power consumption. So we call out the peak power consumption of a particular device. Another vendor might call out the average power consumption. So you just want to be careful that what you're reading is what you're looking at, and you make a judgment based off of that.
For sure.
But they'll tell you if the access point is 802.AT or AF or BT, for example. Mm-hmm. So we do state that information on there, but yeah, you just want to be careful about when you're trying to figure out your power budgets.
For sure. All right, well, that's good. I think we hit enough on PoE. So I think that's enough for this week. Remember to like and subscribe for more help with Wi-Fi.